The setting sun cast long shadows across Sarah Miller's weathered farmhouse as she stood frozen on her porch, disbelieving her tired eyes. A small chestnut foal, its coat matted with dried blood, limped slowly toward her through the tall grass. Something in its desperate gaze spoke directly to her soul, a silent plea that pulled at the loneliness she'd carried since Robert's passing 2 years ago. The young horse shouldn't have been there, miles from any neighboring farm, yet it moved with purpose, as if it had been searching for her specifically. As Sarah knelt beside the trembling animal, her fingers discovered a worn leather cord around its neck, and attached to it, a small metal tag. What could possibly be written on that mysterious tag that would connect this wounded creature to the husband she thought she knew completely? Dawn broke over the Miller farm with indifferent beauty, painting the weathered barn and faded farmhouse with golden light that belied the struggle contained within. Sarah Miller had been awake for hours, her night spent on an old blanket in the corner of the barn, watching the wounded foal's sides rise and fall with each labored breath. She rubbed her stiff neck and studied the photograph she'd brought from her bedside table, Robert on horseback, a rare smile lighting his weathered face. 2 years gone, yet the void he left seemed to expand rather than diminish with time. "He'd know what to do with you," Sarah whispered to the foal, who watched her with liquid brown eyes. The animal had accepted her amateur ministrations with surprising trust. The cleaning of the gash along its flank, the careful wrapping with strips of clean cotton. "Robert always had a way with animals that I never quite managed." Standing with a groan, Sarah made her way to the farmhouse. The morning chores wouldn't wait, wounded foal or not. The old farmhouse creaked a familiar greeting as she entered, every sound amplified in the emptiness. The kitchen calendar still displayed last month's page, bills marked in red, payment dates circled with increasing urgency. The bank's latest notice lay unopened on the table. After Robert's death, she'd tried to keep everything going: the small alfalfa field, the dozen chickens, the vegetable garden, all barely producing enough to keep her afloat. The insurance money had lasted 18 months. Now, each month required increasingly creative accounting. The coffee was just beginning to percolate when a knock sounded at the door. Sarah sighed, knowing without looking who it would be. "Morning, Sarah," Hank Taylor said, hat in hand on her porch. At 65, their nearest neighbor was a fixture in her life. Sometimes welcome, sometimes not. "Saw your lights on in the barn all night. Everything all right?" Sarah hesitated. In the 2 years since Robert's death, she'd grown accustomed to keeping her own counsel. Maplewood was a small village, 20 miles down a winding road, and news traveled like electricity through its grapevine. "Just a stray that wandered in," she said finally. "Nothing to worry about." Hank's weathered face registered polite disbelief. "Animal or human variety?" Despite herself, Sarah smiled. "4 legs, not 2. A foal. Injured. Now where in tarnation did a foal come from?" "Simmons over on County Line lost some stock last week to thieves. But those were yearlings, not foals." "It's not stolen," Sarah said firmly. "It was injured. I'm just helping it." Hank nodded, knowing when not to press. "Need me to call Doc Wilson? He handles livestock still, when pressed." Sarah shook her head. The local veterinarian charged rates she couldn't afford, and explaining the foal's mysterious appearance would invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. "I'll manage." Robert left some veterinary books. "Suit yourself," Hank said. "But that reminds me why I stopped by. Got a call from Emma at the general store. Your order came in. Said some items were running low, so she held them for you." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. The monthly drive into Maplewood was a necessity she dreaded. The pitying looks, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered shops, the inevitable questions about how she was really doing. "I'll head in later today," she said, "after I check on the foal again." After Hank left, Sarah returned to the barn with a bucket of warm water and fresh bandages. The foal had managed to stand, though it favored its injured leg heavily. It nickered softly at her approach. "You need a proper looking at." she told it, setting down her supplies. The metal tag hanging from the leather cord caught the morning light, drawing her attention again. The initials RM were unmistakable now in daylight. Robert Miller. Below them, a series of numbers that looked like coordinates. The sight sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. Robert had been gone 2 years. How could his initials be on a tag around a wounded foal's neck? A foal that couldn't be more than 4 months old. The animal pressed its soft muzzle against her hand, startling her from these unsettling thoughts. Its needs were immediate and real. The mystery could wait, at least until she'd made the dreaded trip to town. But as she carefully cleaned the wound again, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet life she'd cobbled together from the remnants of her marriage was about to change forever. Twilight settled over the farm as Sarah returned from her reluctant trip to Maplewood. The general store visit had been exactly as she'd dreaded. Emma's probing questions barely disguised as concern, the sidelong glances from other customers, the weight of being the subject of village curiosity. She'd grabbed her supplies and fled as quickly as politeness allowed. The foal nickered softly as she entered the barn, its ears perked forward. Despite its injuries, it had managed to drink from the shallow pan of water she'd left, and had nibbled at some hay. "You're a fighter," Sarah murmured, setting down her packages. "That's good. We're both going to need some fight." She settled on the barn floor, wincing at the protest from her knees, and gently examined the wound again. The bleeding had stopped, but the gash looked angry and hot to the touch. The foal flinched but didn't pull away. "I need to find something stronger for this," she said, more to herself than the animal. Sarah made her way back to the house, to the small office that had been Robert's domain. She rarely entered the room. It remained much as he'd left it that final morning, his coffee mug still on the desk, paperwork half finished. The bookshelf against the wall held practical volumes on farming, animal husbandry, and weather patterns. Her fingers traced the spines until she found what she needed. A worn veterinary manual Robert had referenced whenever one of their animals fell ill. He'd been good with animals, better than with people sometimes. The memory brought a sad smile to her face. Back in the barn, Sarah flipped through the yellowed pages by lantern light until she found the section on wound care for equines. The book recommended a poultice of certain herbs, some of which still grew in her neglected garden. As she worked, preparing the poultice according to the manual's instructions, her mind returned to the metal tag. In the soft glow of the lantern, she examined it more closely without removing it from the foal's neck. The coordinates beneath Robert's initials were clearly legible now. Sarah frowned. During their 15 years of marriage, Robert had made monthly trips for supplies, often returning later than expected, sometimes with items that didn't quite match his explanations. She'd never questioned him directly. Their marriage had settled into comfortable patterns that neither disturbed with uncomfortable questions. But now, the foal shifted, drawing her attention back to its needs. She carefully applied the poultice and wrapped it with clean bandages, pleased when the animal seemed to relax under her touch. "There," she said, "that should help." She hesitated, then added, "I suppose you need a name at least until I figure out where you belong." The foal blinked at her with those trusting eyes. "Not that you're staying," Sarah added hastily. "I can barely feed myself these days." She settled back against a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. The coordinates on the tag nagged at her thought. They could be looked up on a map, traced to a physical location. But did she want to know? Robert had his reasons for secrecy. Perhaps they were best left buried with him. The foal took an unsteady step toward her and lowered itself awkwardly to rest its head near her lap. The simple trust of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Robert," she whispered to the empty barn, "what were you mixed up in? What am I supposed to do now?" Only the soft breathing of the foal answered her. Outside, an owl called mournfully into the night. Sarah pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She should go inside, to her proper bed. But the thought of leaving the foal alone seemed impossible. Just for tonight, she told herself, reaching out to stroke the animal's soft muzzle. "Tomorrow I'll figure out what those coordinates mean." The foal's eyes drifted closed under her gentle touch. Sarah leaned her head back against the hay and let her own eyes close, just for a moment. The rhythmic breathing of the animal beside her was oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone on the farm for the first time in 2 years. As she drifted toward sleep, her fingers remained curled around the veterinary manual, its pages open to remedies for healing wounded creatures. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly overhead, indifferent to the small mystery unfolding beneath them, or to the woman who would soon follow coordinates to answers she never knew she needed. The bell above the door of Maplewood General Store jangled merrily, at odds with the heaviness in Sarah's steps as she entered. 3 days had passed since the foal's arrival. Its condition had improved enough that she felt comfortable leaving it for a few hours to seek proper supplies. "Well, look who's graced us twice in 1 week," Emma Davis called from behind the counter. At 58, Emma had run the store for over 30 years and considered herself the village's unofficial historian. "Must be some kind of record, Sarah Miller." Sarah forced a smile. "Just need a few things, Emma, for that mysterious animal Hank mentioned." Emma's eyes gleamed with undisguised curiosity. "He said you found a stray." Sarah nodded non-committally, heading toward the animal care section. Emma followed, abandoning all pretense of giving her space. "Funny thing," Emma continued, her voice pitched just loud enough for the other customers to hear. "Mary Simmons was in yesterday saying they didn't lose any horses in that theft after all. Just had a mix-up in their count." "Good for them," Sarah murmured, selecting antiseptic and proper bandages. "So I wonder where a stray foal might have come from, this time of year." Sarah turned, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "I wonder too, Emma. When I find out, you'll be the first to know." A flush crept up Emma's neck. "And just making conversation, dear. We worry about you out there all alone since Robert passed." At the mention of her husband, Sarah tensed. Her hand slipped into her jacket pocket, fingers brushing against a folded receipt she'd found that morning while searching for a jacket. It had fallen from Robert's old work coat, a receipt from a store called Frontier Supply in a town called Willow Creek. A town she'd never heard of, for items she couldn't recall him bringing home. "I'm managing fine," Sarah said, more curtly than she intended. Emma's expression softened with unmistakable pity. "Of course you are, dear. Though if you ever needed to sell that place—" "I don't," Sarah interrupted, gathering her supplies. "Is Dr. Wilson in town today?" Emma's eyebrows rose. "He's over at the cafe, having his usual late breakfast." "Is it for the animal?" Sarah nodded, paid for her purchases, and left before Emma could ask more questions. The small cafe across the street was half full with the morning crowd. Dr. James Wilson sat alone by the window, newspaper spread before him, coffee cup in hand. At 62, Wilson was the closest thing to a veterinarian the village had. His medical practice officially focused on humans, but in rural areas like Maplewood, doctors often crossed specialties when needed. Dr. Wilson, Sarah greeted him, stopping at his table. "Could I have a moment?" He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sarah Miller. Twice in town this week. Must be serious." Sarah's smile was tight. "News travels fast. Small town," he replied simply. "What can I help you with?" She described the foal's condition as clinically as possible, omitting the mysterious tag and how the animal had seemed to find her. Wilson listened, asking occasional questions about the wound and the foal's behavior. "Sounds like you're doing everything right," he concluded. "Keep it clean, watch for infection. I can stop by tomorrow if you'd like a proper look." "I'd appreciate that," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "But I can't afford much." Wilson waved away her concern. "Robert helped me fix my tractor 3 times without charging me. Consider it partial repayment." At the mention of her husband, Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Dr. Wilson, did Robert ever mention a place called Willow Creek to you?" The doctor's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Something flickered across his face before he carefully set the cup down. "Can't say that he did." "Why do you ask?" Sarah showed him the receipt. "Found this in his things. It's from a store there. Wilson studied it briefly before handing it back. Lots of little towns scattered through these hills. Robert traveled for supplies sometimes, didn't he? Yes, but... Sarah, Wilson interrupted gently. Some men need space. It doesn't mean anything was wrong. The unspoken implication hung between them. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's not like that. I just found it strange, that's all. Wilson's gaze was kind but firm. Robert was a good man. Sometimes the best thing we can do for those we've lost is to let them rest in peace. Sarah gathered her purchases, unsettled by his reaction and the slight emphasis on rest in peace. Outside, she paused on the sidewalk, looking down the main street of the village where she'd lived her entire adult life, yet suddenly felt like a stranger. Behind her, whispers resumed in the cafe as the door closed. Ahead of her lay the road home to a farm sliding toward financial ruin, and a wounded foal with an inexplicable connection to a husband she was beginning to realize she might never have fully known. Dr. Wilson's examination of the foal the following day had been thorough and reassuring. "You've done well by this little one," he'd told Sarah, packing away his instruments. "The wound is healing nicely. Another week of rest should see significant improvement." He'd asked no questions about the tag around the foal's neck, though Sarah had caught him studying it when he thought she wasn't looking. His silence on the matter somehow unsettled her more than Emma's direct prying. Now, a week after the foal's arrival, Sarah sat at Robert's desk, the metal tag carefully removed from the foal's neck and threaded onto a piece of string, laying before her. The coordinates had been entered into an old atlas Robert kept, narrowing the location to somewhere in the next county over. The foal was recovering enough to be left alone in the barn for longer periods. Sarah had run out of excuses not to investigate further. With a deep breath, she pulled open the bottom drawer of Robert's desk, the one that had always remained locked during his life. After his death, she'd found the small key taped beneath the drawer above it, but had never felt the need to look inside until now. The drawer slid open with a soft groan of disuse. Inside lay a county map, newer than the atlas, with several areas circled in red pen. Sarah spread it across the desk, her heart quickening as she located the coordinates from the tag. They matched precisely with one of the circled areas. "What were you up to, Robert?" she whispered, tracing the circle with her finger. The location appeared to be nestled in a valley some 40 miles away. No town name was marked, but a small notation in Robert's handwriting read simply, "W.C. Willow Creek." Sarah sat back, pieces clicking into place. The monthly trips for supplies, the receipt from Frontier Supply in Willow Creek, the coordinates all connected to whatever WC was. She rifled through the other contents of the drawer, receipts similar to the one she'd found, a small notebook with cryptic entries of dates and amounts, and a folded newspaper clipping about county funding for rural initiatives. Nothing that explained what drew Robert repeatedly to this remote location, or why he'd kept it secret from her. The tag around the foal's neck now seemed less coincidental and more deliberate, as if the animal had been sent to her. But by whom? Robert had been dead for 2 years. Who would connect a young foal to him now, and why send it to her injured and alone? Sarah closed her eyes, memories washing over her. In their early years together, Robert had loved to ride. They'd kept 2 horses then, before financial hardships forced them to sell. She remembered his gentle way with animals, the softness that came into his voice when he spoke to them, a tenderness he sometimes struggled to express to people, even her. In their later years, that passion seemed to fade, or so she'd thought. Now she wondered if it had simply been redirected elsewhere, to whatever lay at those coordinates. The sound of tires on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. Through the window she saw Hank's battered pickup coming up the drive. She quickly returned everything to the drawer except the map, which she folded and slipped into her pocket. "Afternoon, Sarah," Hank called as she met him on the porch. "Thought I'd check on your patient." Sarah led him to the barn, where the foal greeted them with a soft nicker. It was standing more steadily now, the wound on its flank healing into a pink line. "Looking good," Hank said approvingly. You've got away with animals. Robert did, Sarah corrected softly. I'm just following his books. Hank watched her thoughtfully. You've seemed preoccupied lately. Everything all right? Sarah hesitated. Hank had been Robert's friend long before becoming hers by default after his death. They'd worked adjoining fields, shared equipment, helped each other through harsh winters. If anyone might know Robert's secrets, it would be Hank. Did Robert ever mention a place called Willow Creek to you? She asked. Something flickered in Hank's weathered face, the same subtle reaction she'd seen in Dr. Wilson. Can't say that he did. Why? The matching responses, too similar to be coincidence, made her decision for her. No reason, just found some old receipts. Hank nodded, seemingly relieved by her casual tone. Well, I should get back. Got a fence needing repair before sundown. As his truck disappeared down the drive, Sarah returned to the barn. The foal had lain down in the fresh straw, watching her with those intelligent eyes. Tomorrow, she told it, stroking its velvet muzzle. Tomorrow we're going to find out what Robert was hiding in Willow Creek. As if understanding, the foal nickered softly and pressed its head against her hand. Morning arrived with a gentle rain that drummed against the farmhouse roof. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, a cup of cooling coffee forgotten in her hand, as she watched droplets chase each other down the glass. The weather matched her mood, unsettled, hesitant, yet persistent. On the counter behind her lay Robert's truck keys with their small horseshoe keychain, a birthday gift she'd given him years ago when they could still afford such gestures. She rarely drove the old Ford, preferring her smaller, more economical sedan for trips into town. The truck remained Robert's domain even in his absence, parked in the equipment shed where he'd left it that final morning. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Hank stood on the porch, rain darkening the shoulders of his jacket. Wanted to check if you needed anything before I head into the city, he said. Might be gone a couple days. My sister's not doing too well. I'm sorry to hear that, Sarah replied. The timing was fortuitous, if awkward. Actually, I was planning a trip myself. Would you mind keeping an eye on things when you get back? Just checking that nothing's amiss. Hank's eyebrows lifted slightly. A trip? Where to, if you don't mind my asking? Sarah had prepared for this. The county extension office. Thought I'd look into some of those agricultural grants Dr. Wilson mentioned. The lie came easier than expected, settling uncomfortably in her chest. Hank's expression relaxed. Good thinking. About time you got some help with this place. He hesitated. What about your four-legged visitor? Sarah hadn't considered that. The foal was healing well but still needed attention. The thought of leaving it behind created an unexpected pang of distress. I'll make arrangements, she said, not entirely sure how. After Hank left, Sarah found herself in the barn, explaining her dilemma to the foal as if it might offer a solution. The animal watched her with those deep brown eyes, then struggled to its feet, testing its weight on the injured leg. You're getting stronger, Sarah observed, but you're not ready for a 40-mile journey. The foal took a tentative step toward her, then another, its movements still careful but steadier than before. It butted its head gently against her arm. You want to come? Sarah asked, feeling foolish for addressing the animal, as if it could understand. Yet something in its demeanor seemed almost insistent. It won't be comfortable. By mid-morning, Sarah had made her decision. She cleared space in the back of Robert's truck, creating a makeshift stall with hay bales and old blankets. Loading the still weak foal proved challenging, but with patience and gentle coaxing, she managed to get it settled. Inside the house she packed lightly, a change of clothes, some food, the map from Robert's desk. In the bathroom she paused before the mirror, studying the face that looked back at her. 2 years of widowhood had etched new lines around her eyes, threaded silver through her brown hair. The woman in the glass looked uncertain, apprehensive yet somehow determined. You can do this, she told her reflection, unsure if she believed it. The rain had stopped by the time she climbed into the truck's cab, the keys heavy in her hand. The horseshoe keychain caught the light, the metal worn smooth from years in Robert's pocket. Starting the engine felt like crossing a boundary from the known world of her quiet grief into something undefined. The truck rumbled down the driveway past the faded mailbox with Miller, painted in Robert's careful script. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror, watching her farmhouse recede. In the truck bed, the foal stood braced between hay bales, its gaze fixed forward as if it knew exactly where they were headed. The first 10 miles passed in tense silence, Sarah hyper-aware of every bump and turn that might disturb her passenger. Gradually, the familiar landscape gave way to areas she rarely visited, rolling hills that hid small valleys, scattered farms with cattle grazing on spring-green pastures, and eventually smaller roads that twisted through increasingly wooded terrain. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the truck. The lingering scent of Robert's aftershave, the worn spot on the steering wheel where his hands had rested, the country music station that automatically tuned in when she switched on the radio. His presence seemed to fill the cab, not as a ghost, but as a memory so strong it felt tangible. "What am I going to find, Robert?" she asked aloud. "What were you hiding from me all those years?" The road wound higher into unfamiliar hills, and Sarah felt a curious mixture of dread and anticipation building within her. Whatever waited at those coordinates would change everything: her understanding of her husband, her marriage, perhaps even her future. The only certainty was that she could never return to the comfortable numbness of her life before the foal arrived with its mysterious tag. The midday sun filtered through the canopy of trees that increasingly lined the winding road. Sarah had been driving for nearly 3 hours, the landscape growing more remote with each passing mile. Towns became smaller, farther apart, until they were little more than crossroads, with a general store and perhaps a gas station. Every 30 minutes or so, she pulled over to check on the foal. Each time, she found it standing patiently in its makeshift pen, watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed too knowing for a young animal. Not much farther now, she told it during their latest stop, though in truth, she wasn't entirely sure. The roads had become increasingly unmarked, requiring frequent consultations with the map spread across the passenger seat. As she climbed back into the cab, her hand brushed against the glove compartment, causing it to fall open. Among the expected items: vehicle registration, a flashlight, tire pressure gauge. Something caught her eye: a business card, its edges worn as if handled frequently. She picked it up, her breath catching as she read the embossed text. "Willow Creek Horse Rescue. Every soul deserves a second chance." On the back, a handwritten note in what was unmistakably Robert's handwriting: "Monthly delivery, first Tuesday." Sarah stared at the card, her mind raced. A horse rescue. Not a town, not a store, but a sanctuary for horses. The coordinates, the WC notation on the map, Robert's unexplained absences, all suddenly made a kind of sense that left her light-headed. She tucked the card carefully into her pocket and started the truck again. The foal shifted in the back, its movements more animated than before, as if it sensed they were nearing their destination. The next small town appeared around a bend in the road. Little more than a cluster of buildings with a sign declaring it Pine Junction. Sarah pulled into the only gas station, an ancient place with analog pumps and a small market. Afternoon greeted the attendant, an elderly man with deep lines etched into his sun-weathered face. "Don't get many visitors through here this time of year." "I'm looking for Willow Creek," Sarah said, watching his reaction carefully. "The horse rescue." Recognition flickered across his features, followed by open curiosity. "You're about 20 minutes out. Take the fork just past the bridge. Follow the creek road. Can't miss it." He peered through the window at her truck. "You bringing them a new rescue?" Sarah glanced back at the foal. "No, I'm investigating something. Did you ever meet a man named Robert Miller? He would have come through here regularly." The man's face brightened. "Robert? Sure, good fellow. Stopped in every month like clockwork for years. Always had time for a chat, unlike most city folks passing through." His expression shifted to one of concern. "Haven't seen him in a good while, though. Everything all right with him?" The casual inquiry struck Sarah like a physical blow. "He passed away 2 years ago." The man removed his cap. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, ma'am." He was a fine man, always bringing supplies out to Grace and her horses. He shook his head sadly. "That explains why those poor creatures have been struggling lately." "Grace?" Sarah asked. The unfamiliar name, another piece of this expanding puzzle. "Grace Thompson runs the rescue, getting on in years herself now, but stubborn as they come." He hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, you would be Sarah Miller, Robert's wife." The man's eyebrows shot up. His wife. Well now, something in his tone suggested surprise that bordered on confusion. "He mentioned family, but I didn't realize. Well, Grace will be glad to see you, I expect." Sarah paid for her gas, unsettled by the man's reaction. As she climbed back into the truck, his words echoed in her mind. He mentioned family. What exactly had Robert told these people about her? About their life together? The road beyond Pine Junction narrowed further, following alongside a clear, rushing creek that cut through the valley. The foal became increasingly animated with each mile, nickering softly and shifting its weight in anticipation. "You know where we're going, don't you?" Sarah murmured, glancing at the animal in her rearview mirror. "You've been leading me here all along." The realization didn't anger her, as it might have days ago. Instead, she felt a growing sense that she was being guided toward something important, something Robert had meant for her to find, perhaps not like this or now, but eventually. As the truck rounded a final bend, the trees opened up to reveal a valley bathed in afternoon light. A wooden sign, hand-painted and weathered by years of sun and rain, stood at the entrance to a long driveway. "Willow Creek Horse Rescue. All weary souls. Welcome." Sarah stopped the truck, her heart pounding. Beyond the sign lay the answer to the mystery that had arrived at her door with a wounded foal. Beyond the sign lay a part of Robert's life he had never shared with her. She took a deep breath and turned onto the gravel drive, the sound of the wheels crunching beneath her like the closing of a chapter she hadn't known needed ending. The gravel drive wound through a meadow dotted with wildflowers before opening onto a modest clearing. Sarah's breath caught at the unexpected beauty of the place. A weathered barn stood painted a faded red, beside it a small, tidy farmhouse with a wide porch. Paddocks extended in several directions, containing a handful of horses of various ages and conditions. Some grazed peacefully, others watched the approaching truck with pricked ears. The hand-painted sign beside the barn read, "Willow Creek Horse Rescue" in carefully crafted lettering, the paint faded but meticulously maintained. Below it, in smaller script, Est. 1984, Grace Thompson, founder. As Sarah parked, the foal in the back became increasingly restless, nickering loudly. The sound drew the attention of a woman who emerged from the barn, tall and lean, with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing work clothes stained with honest labor. Despite her obvious age, she moved with purpose and strength. "Can I help you?" she called, her voice carrying across the yard as she approached. Then her eyes fell on the truck bed and the foal inside. She stopped abruptly, one hand rising to her mouth. "Sweet heaven," she whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear as she stepped from the cab. "You brought him back? You know this foal?" Sarah asked, moving toward the truck bed. The woman, Grace, Sarah presumed, approached slowly, her weathered face a complex mixture of emotions. "Born here 3 months ago. His mother was the last rescue Robert brought in before." She trailed off, studying Sarah with newfound intensity. "You're Sarah?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you're Grace Thompson?" Grace nodded, her attention divided between Sarah and the foal, who was now attempting to climb over the hay bales. "Let's get him out of there before he hurts himself again." Together they lowered the tailgate and helped the foal down. The moment its hooves touched the ground, the animal's demeanor changed. It nickered loudly, almost prancing despite its healing wound, and moved with surprising speed toward a paddock, where a chestnut mare stood watching intently. "His mother," Grace explained softly. "She's been calling for him since he disappeared 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks? But he only appeared at my farm 8 days ago." Grace's expression darkened. Someone took him. We had a break-in. 2 foals were taken, this one and another. We found the other one abandoned on the roadside, but this little one was just gone. Her gaze returned to Sarah, sharp with unspoken questions. Until now, the mare and foal touched noses through the fence, their reunion so tender that Sarah had to look away, uncomfortable with the emotion tightening her throat. When she glanced back at Grace, she found the older woman watching her with an unreadable expression. "You had no idea, did you?" Grace asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "About this place, about Robert's involvement, no." A complex emotion crossed Grace's face, something like sadness mixed with resignation. "That sounds like Robert, always keeping his worlds separate." The words stung more than they should have. "You knew him well? For nearly 15 years. Grace gestured toward the house. "Come inside. I think we both need to sit down for this conversation." The interior of the small farmhouse was simple but comfortable, with worn furniture that invited you to sit and stay a while. Pictures adorned the walls, mostly of horses, but interspersed among them were photos of people with the rescued animals. Sarah's step faltered as she recognized Robert in several of them, looking more relaxed and genuinely happy than she remembered seeing him in their later years together. "Tea," Grace offered, moving toward a kettle already on the stove. "Please," Sarah replied automatically, still absorbing the visual evidence of Robert's secret life surrounding her. Grace worked efficiently in the small kitchen, the movements of someone comfortable in their space. "I never thought I'd meet you," she said over her shoulder. "Robert talked about you, of course, but he was clear that these 2 parts of his life would never intersect." "Why?" The question escaped before Sarah could soften it. "Why keep this from me?" Grace turned, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. Her expression was gentle, but direct. "That's not for me to answer, but I think Robert left you clues in his way." She nodded toward the window where they could see the foal and mare still nuzzling each other across the fence. That tag around the foal's neck, it was Robert's idea. A backup, he called it. "A backup for what?" "For the future," Grace replied, setting the mugs on a small table and gesturing for Sarah to join her. "For when the sanctuary needed help, and I couldn't manage alone anymore." She settled into her chair with a soft sigh. "I think it's time I told you about the Robert Miller I knew, and the work he did here. It might not be the man you thought you married, but it was still him, maybe the truest version of him there was." Grace set her mug down and reached for a weathered leather-bound book on the nearby shelf. "Robert started coming here 15 years ago," she began, placing the book on the table between them. "We had a horse with a difficult birth. Local vet couldn't help. Someone mentioned Robert had a way with animals." Sarah's fingers curled tighter around her mug. "He always did. He saved both mare and foal that night," Grace continued. "Stayed up 36 hours straight. Wouldn't accept payment. Said seeing them survive was enough." She opened the book, revealing columns of handwritten entries, dates and amounts, each with the simple notation RM in the final column. Instead, he started bringing supplies every month. Feed, medicine, equipment. Then about 12 years ago, he started the... Sarah stared at the ledger, recognition dawning. "Financial contributions." Grace nodded. "Anonymous to everyone but me. Said he didn't want recognition, just wanted to help." She turned the pages, showing year after year of regular entries. "It wasn't much at first, whatever he could spare, I suspect. But it was consistent, never missed a month." Sarah's mind raced through calculations, the timing aligned with when their farm had begun to struggle financially. Years when Robert had insisted on handling the accounts himself, when she had believed they were barely staying afloat. "We were having problems with the farm back then," she said quietly. "How could he afford this?" "He worked here," Grace replied simply. "Those monthly trips weren't just for deliveries. He stayed, sometimes for days, helping with the difficult cases. He had a gift, especially with the abused ones." She gestured toward the photos on the walls. "He could reach horses everyone else had given up on." Sarah studied the nearest photo, Robert, kneeling beside a atel horse, with dull eyes, his hand gently extended. I never knew this side of him. He said you didn't share his passion for horses. After you had to sell yours, he thought it would hurt you to know he'd found this place. The words landed like a gentle accusation. Sarah remembered the relief she'd felt when they'd sold their horses, not because she didn't care, but because watching Robert's heartbreak each time financial constraints limited their care had become unbearable. It wasn't that I didn't care, she said, voicing the thought. It was that he cared so much, it hurt him when we couldn't do enough. Grace's expression softened with understanding. He loved them because they didn't judge, didn't expect. They just responded to kindness, with trust. She sipped her tea, eyes distant with memory. The day he brought in Midnight, that's the foal's mother, was his last visit. She'd been badly abused, heavily pregnant. He found her at an auction, bound for slaughter. She shook her head. He was so angry that day, said he couldn't keep watching this happen, not when we could do more. What did he mean? He had plans to expand the sanctuary, had been saving for years. Grace turned to the back of the ledger, where a folded paper was tucked between the pages. He drew up proposals, talked about bringing in more volunteers, maybe even turning it into a therapy program for troubled youth. Sarah unfolded the paper, a sketch in Robert's precise hand of expanded facilities, paddocks, a covered arena. In the corner, a note for the future, for what matters. The accident happened 2 days later, Grace said softly, on his way home to you. The implication hung in the air between them. Robert had died returning from this place, this sanctuary that had captured his heart in ways his own home apparently hadn't. After he died, Grace continued, the contributions stopped. I tried to find you, to explain, but he'd been clear about keeping his worlds separate. All I had was a surname and the general direction he drove home. You've been struggling, Sarah observed, seeing now the signs of financial strain around the modest property, repairs left undone, equipment patched, rather than replaced. We've managed, Grace said with quiet dignity, but we've had to turn away cases we once would have taken. The night someone broke in and took the foals, they also took medicine, feed, anything they could sell quickly, and the tag around the foal's neck. Robert created them for our most vulnerable cases. Identification, tracking, kept adding to the system, the coordinates, the backup information. Grace's gaze was steady. I believe he meant for the tags, to lead back to help if anything ever happened to him or to me. He just never thought it would be you who followed them here. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, the foal had been reunited with its mother in the paddock, pressed against her side as if making up for lost time. Other horses grazed peacefully in the golden afternoon light. She could almost see Robert here, in his element, doing work that mattered deeply to him. Why didn't he just tell me? She whispered. Behind her, Grace sighed. Sometimes the things we care about most are the hardest to share. We fear judgment, misunderstandings, or perhaps he thought he was protecting you from another burden. Sarah turned back to face the older woman, a new understanding taking root. He sent that foal to me, didn't he? Not directly, but somehow he made sure that if anything happened, I would find my way here. I believe he did, Grace said simply. Robert Miller was a man who planned for contingencies, and in his way I think he was finally ready for his worlds to meet. Grace set her empty mug aside and stood with the careful movements of someone who had learned to live with persistent pain. There's something else, she said, crossing to an old secretary desk in the corner of the room. She unlocked a small drawer and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age, the seal unbroken. Robert left this with me about 5 years ago. Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to give it to you, but only if you found your way here on your own. Sarah stared at the envelope in Grace's outstretched hand, her husband's distinctive handwriting spelling out her name. He knew I might come here someday, he hoped, Grace corrected gently, but he wanted it to be your choice, your journey, not something thrust upon you. Sarah accepted the envelope but didn't open it, instead turning it over in her hands, as if it might reveal its contents through touch alone. Robert had held this, sealed it, entrusted it to Grace with specific instructions. The thought made him feel simultaneously closer and further away than he had in the 2 years since his death. "I need some time before I read this," she said finally. Grace nodded in understanding. "Of course, why don't I show you around? The daylight won't last much longer." Outside, the sanctuary was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Grace led Sarah through the main barn, pointing out improvements Robert had helped implement: the drainage system, the reinforced stalls, the medication storage area. Each detail revealed another facet of the husband Sarah thought she had known completely. "Most of our residents come from abuse or neglect situations," Grace explained, as they moved among the paddocks. "Some from slaughter auctions, others abandoned when they were no longer useful to their owners. We rehabilitate them physically and emotionally." Sarah watched a dappled grey mare with a twisted leg approach the fence cautiously. "And then, some find new homes with carefully vetted families. Others stay here as permanent residents too damaged for adoption or needing ongoing care." Grace's voice softened. Robert understood that some wounds never fully heal, but that doesn't mean the life isn't worth saving. They approached the paddock, where the foal and its mother stood together beneath a maple tree. The mare, Midnight, raised her head warily as they neared, but the foal trotted over to the fence, recognizing Sarah. "He's bonded with you," Grace observed. "That's unusual considering what he's been through." Sarah reached out, stroking the foal's velvet muzzle. "I still don't understand how he ended up at my farm, injured and alone." Grace's expression darkened. "The thieves likely realized a foal this young would be difficult to sell quickly. When he was injured in transit, perhaps trying to escape, they probably abandoned him rather than risk being caught with stolen property. But how did he find his way specifically to my farm? It's miles from here, and there are dozens of properties he could have approached for help." Grace shrugged slightly. "Horses have instincts we don't fully understand. Or maybe," she trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Maybe what? Robert always said there was something special about this place, something that changed the animals that came here, made them more aware. It's fanciful thinking, I suppose." Sarah thought of the foal's intelligent eyes, the way it had seemed to know exactly where to go, both to her farm and now here at the sanctuary. Perhaps there was something to Grace's fanciful thinking after all. The tour continued past a small covered arena, Robert's project for working with the most traumatized cases in private, and ended at a modest cabin near the creek that gave the sanctuary its name. Robert stayed here during his visits, Grace said, pushing open the door to reveal a simple one-room structure with a bed, desk, small kitchenette and bathroom. "You're welcome to use it tonight. I imagine you'll want privacy to read that." She nodded toward the envelope still in Sarah's hand. The cabin was neat but clearly lived in, with books stacked beside the bed and a jacket. Robert's jacket still hanging on a peg by the door. Sarah's throat tightened at the sight. "I'll leave you to settle in," Grace said. "There's food in the small refrigerator. Come up to the house if you need anything." Alone in the gathering dusk, Sarah moved through the space that had been Robert's retreat. She ran her fingers over the spines of books, veterinary texts, horse training manuals, and surprisingly, several volumes of poetry. The desk contained notebooks filled with his handwriting, observations about specific horses, treatment plans, sketches for sanctuary improvements. This place, this cabin, held more of Robert than their farmhouse had in their final years together. The realization wasn't as painful as she might have expected. Instead, it felt like discovering a missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. As the last light faded from the sky, Sarah sat on the small porch overlooking the creek, the unopened letter in her lap. Across the pastures she could see the lights of the main house and the shapes of horses settling for the night. The foal and its mother stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, peaceful in their reunion. Sarah took a deep breath and broke the seal on the envelope, unfolding the pages within as twilight deepened around her. The paper trembled slightly in Sarah's hands as she unfolded her husband's letter. Robert's distinctive handwriting filled several pages. The blue ink faded, but still legible in the warm light spilling from the cabin. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, two things have happened. I am no longer with you, and you found your way to Willow Creek. I'm sorry for both. Sorry to have left you, and sorry that you discovered this place without me beside you to explain. How do I begin to tell you about the part of my life I kept from you for 15 years? There are no excuses that feel adequate. Perhaps the simplest truth is that I was a coward. I feared you wouldn't understand, that you would see this sanctuary as another financial burden when our own farm struggled. Or worse, that you would understand completely and resent me for giving so much of myself to this place and these animals when our own dreams withered. Sarah paused, memories washing over her. Their early marriage had been filled with shared dreams, expanding the farm, raising children, building a legacy together. Gradually, financial hardships and a series of miscarriages had eroded those dreams, leaving them living parallel lives under the same roof. She continued reading. I found Willow Creek by accident. After we sold our horses, I was angry that day, at the world, at our circumstances, perhaps even at you for accepting what felt like defeat to me. I drove aimlessly and ended up here, where Grace was struggling to save a horse that everyone else had given up on. Something broke open in me that day. I realized I'd been carrying grief I couldn't name, not just for our horses or the children we never had, but for the connection we seemed to be losing with each hardship. Here, with these damaged creatures, I found purpose again. I could heal something, even if I couldn't heal what was broken between us. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She set the letter down and moved to the desk, where she had noticed a leather-bound journal earlier. Opening it, she found dated entries in Robert's hand, detailed observations about specific horses, their progress, setbacks, breakthroughs. Between these clinical notes were more personal reflections. April 17, tried to tell Sarah about the sanctuary today. Started to explain my supply runs, take longer because I'm helping Grace with a new rescue. Saw the worry in her eyes about money, about time away from the farm. Changed course mid-sentence, talked about feed prices instead. Cowardice again. The distance between us grows. June 3rd, Storm spoke to new mare today. Spent hours just sitting in her stall, talking to her until she calmed. Remembered doing the same with Sarah during those terrible nights after the last miscarriage. When did we stop comforting each other? When did silence become easier than words? Sarah flipped through more entries, seeing their marriage through Robert's eyes, his frustrations, his guilt over his secret life, his gradual acceptance that they had drifted into separate orbits. The journal chronicled not just the sanctuary's horses, but the slow dimming of a marriage neither of them knew how to save. She returned to the letter, her heart heavy, yet somehow lightened by these newfound truths. 2 years ago, I made a decision. I began setting aside more money, making plans to eventually bring these two worlds together. The expansion plans you've likely seen by now were the first step. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that could support us both, while doing work that mattered. I meant to show you all of this, to bring you here when the timing was right, when I could present it not as a drain on our resources, but as our future together. I imagined your skepticism giving way to understanding as you saw what happens here, the healing, the second chances. If you're reading this now, time ran out before I found my courage. For that, I am deeply sorry. There is a legal document with Grace. I've arranged for a portion of our farm's insurance to support Willow Creek, if anything happened to me. I know this may feel like another betrayal, another secret kept. All I can ask is that you try to understand that this place saved me when I felt most lost. These horses gave me purpose when our dreams were slipping away. Whatever you decide about Willow Creek, to continue my support, to walk away, to forge your own connection, know that I never stopped loving you. My heart was divided, but never false. The foal's mother, if Grace's suspicions are correct, will likely have delivered by the time you read this. I've instructed Grace to tag any offspring with our coordinates. A backup plan, a way to connect these separate worlds if something happened to me. A final bridge I hope might lead you here, to understanding if not forgiveness. All my love, always. Robert. Sarah folded the letter carefully and moved to the cabin door. Outside, the sanctuary lay peaceful under a blanket of stars, the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, carrying on the gentle breeze. She thought of the foal that had appeared at her farm, Robert's final message, his last attempt to bridge the worlds he had kept separate for so long. In her other hand, she held his journal, a record of a man she had lived with, but never fully known, a man who had loved deeply if imperfectly, a man who had found healing in this place that he had desperately wanted to share with her, but never found the right moment, the right words. I understand now, she whispered to the night sky. I wish you had told me, but I understand. Sleep eluded Sarah despite the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day. The cabin, with its lingering traces of Robert's presence, felt both comforting and unsettling. A physical manifestation of the man she was discovering had been a stranger in so many ways. Around midnight, she abandoned the narrow bed and wrapped herself in a worn quilt she found folded in a trunk. Outside, the spring night was cool but not uncomfortable. The sanctuary lay quiet under a canopy of stars, more brilliant here away from even the modest lights of Maplewood. A soft nicker drew her attention to a figure moving across the nearest paddock. Grace, making a late check on her charges. Sarah hesitated, then called out softly. Couldn't sleep either, Grace asked as Sarah approached the fence. Too much to process, Sarah admitted. Do you always check on them this late? Most nights. Old habits. Grace's smile was visible in the moonlight. The troubled ones sometimes have nightmares. Like people. The simple comparison hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of Robert's letter, his description of animals whose traumas mirrored human pain. There's an album, Grace said suddenly. In the main house. I should have shown you earlier. Curiosity pulled Sarah after the older woman, back to the farmhouse kitchen now lit only by a single lamp. Grace retrieved a leather-bound album from a shelf and placed it on the table. Robert started this his second year here, she explained, opening to the first page. The photographs told a story more eloquent than words. Robert with various horses over the years, his face changing subtly with the passage of time. In the earliest photos, he looked much as Sarah remembered him, guarded, careful, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, but as the pages turned, a transformation became evident. Robert with a chestnut mare, his expression open and joyful. Robert sleeping in a stall beside a recovering foal, his face peaceful in a way Sarah couldn't remember seeing at home. He called this one redemption, Grace said, pointing to a photograph of Robert with a severely malnourished black stallion. Previous owner used him for racing, then abandoned him when he broke down. Robert spent 3 months rebuilding his trust, wouldn't give up even when I thought the horse was too far gone. Sarah touched the image gently. He looked so alive, Grace finished. He came alive here in ways he couldn't elsewhere. The observation stung, but Sarah couldn't deny its truth. The man in these photographs was more vibrant, more present than the husband who had moved through their home with quiet resignation in their later years. Were you and he? Sarah couldn't finish the question, but Grace understood. No, she said firmly. Robert loved you. He spoke of you often, always with tenderness. Our connection was different. We recognized something wounded in each other and found healing in this work. She turned another page. He kept trying to find ways to bring you here, you know. He'd start stories about the sanctuary, then stop himself, afraid you'd see it as a betrayal. It might have felt that way once, Sarah admitted. We were struggling to keep our own farm afloat. The thought that he was supporting another property might have been hard to accept. Grace nodded in understanding. That's what held him back. He feared hurting you more than he feared maintaining the deception. They continued through the album, Grace providing context for each image, the circumstances of rescues, Robert's role in rehabilitation, the outcomes for each animal. The narrative that emerged was of a man who had found his calling in the broken creatures that others had discarded. The last entry, Grace said, turning to the final filled page. The photograph showed Robert with Midnight, the foal's mother, her pregnant belly evident, taken 3 days before the accident. Sarah studied the image, Robert's hand resting protectively on the mare's flank, his expression both concerned and determined. He knew she was carrying the foal when he rescued her. That's why he was so intent on saving her, said the mare. And her foal deserved a chance at the life they were meant for, not the one circumstances had forced upon them. Grace closed the album gently. I think he was talking about more than just the horses. They sat in silence for a moment, the album between them a bridge across years of separate memories. He had plans for this place, Grace said finally. Vision, funding, ideas. But after he died, she gestured vaguely, encompassing the challenges of maintaining the sanctuary alone. The legal document he mentioned in his letter, Sarah prompted. The insurance money. Grace nodded. I have it. Never filed it. Didn't seem right without explaining everything to you first. And now you're here, Grace said simply, which means decisions need to be made by you, but not tonight. She stood slowly. The guest room is made up if you'd prefer not to go back to the cabin. Sarah shook her head. I need to be close to him tonight, even if it's just his things. As she walked back to the cabin under the vast starry sky, Sarah felt Robert's presence more strongly than she had since his death. Not as a ghost, but as a more complete person, flawed, complex, divided, yet ultimately guided by a compassionate heart she had always known was there, even when she couldn't reach it. Inside the cabin, she placed the album Grace had insisted she take on the small desk beside Robert's journal. Together they formed a more complete picture of the husband she had lost, and was, perhaps, finally beginning to find. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin windows. Sarah had finally fallen asleep in the early hours. Robert's journal open beside her. She woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. After a quick wash in the small bathroom, she headed to the main house where she found Grace already at work, sorting medications in the kitchen. Coffee's fresh, Grace said without looking up. Help yourself. The domesticity of the moment struck Sarah. How quickly she had slipped into the rhythm of this place that had been Robert's sanctuary for so many years. She poured herself a cup and sat at the table. I need to see it, she said after a moment. The legal document Robert mentioned. Grace nodded as if she'd been expecting this. She disappeared briefly and returned with a sealed envelope. Unlike Robert's letter, this one bore formal markings, a law firm's letterhead, notary stamps. He prepared it about 3 years ago, Grace explained, placing it on the table. Asked me to hold it, not to file it unless absolutely necessary. Sarah opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the official-looking document inside. The legal language was dense, but the essence was clear. Robert had amended their will without her knowledge, designating a portion of their farm's insurance payout to support Willow Creek in the event of his death. He never filed this, Sarah said, looking up at Grace. This isn't legally binding. No, Grace agreed. He said he wanted to tell you himself first. Make it a joint decision, she sighed. Then the accident happened, and I was left holding his intentions with no legal authority to act on them. Sarah studied the document more closely, noting the amounts. The sum was significant enough to have kept the sanctuary operating comfortably for several years. Money that had instead remained part of the insurance payout she had used to maintain their farm. Why didn't you contact me after he died? Tell me about this place. Grace's expression was complicated, part regret, part stubborn pride. Robert was adamant that you should find your way here yourself, if at all. Said forcing his worlds together might do more harm than good. She shrugged. Besides, how would that conversation have gone? Hello? I'm a stranger your husband spent time with in secret for 15 years, and by the way, he wanted to give me part of his insurance money. Put that way, it did seem impossible. Sarah folded the document and returned it to the envelope. "The sanctuary has struggled since his contributions stopped," she observed, glancing around the kitchen where signs of careful economizing were evident. Patched linens, well-worn equipment, supplies clearly stretched to last. "We've managed," Grace said with the same quiet dignity she'd shown the day before. "Taken in fewer rescues, focused on the ones already here. But yes, it's been difficult." Sarah thought of her own struggles over the past 2 years, the loneliness, the financial strain, the gradual acceptance that she might need to sell the farm that had been in Robert's family for generations. "I should resent this place," she said suddenly. "The time it took from him, the resources, the energy he poured into it instead of our marriage." "Many would," Grace acknowledged. "But I don't," Sarah continued, surprising herself with the realization. Seeing him in those photographs, reading his journal, he found something here that he lost somewhere along the way in our life together. Grace nodded slowly. "Purpose is a powerful thing. Some find it in family, some in work. Robert found it here, with creatures that needed exactly what he had to give." They were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A young woman stood on the porch, her expression anxious. "Miss Thompson, sorry to bother you so early, but Dad sent me to tell you the bank called. They need to see you today about the extension." Grace's face remained carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the flash of worry in her eyes. "Thank you, Jenny. Tell your father I'll be there this afternoon." After the young woman left, Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Extension?" Grace busied herself with the medications again. "Just routine business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." "The sanctuary is in financial trouble," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. After a long pause, Grace nodded. "The mortgage has become challenging since Robert's contributions. We've had some local donations, but not enough." She managed a tight smile. "Hence the importance of that meeting today. I'm hoping for another extension on the payments." Sarah absorbed this information, thinking of her own precarious financial situation at the farm. The irony wasn't lost on her. Both properties struggling in Robert's absence, both significant to the man he had been. "I should go with you," she said, "to the bank." Grace looked surprised. "That's not necessary. This isn't your burden, isn't it?" Sarah gestured toward the document on the table between them. Robert clearly thought both places mattered. "I want to understand exactly what's at stake here." Their eyes met in a moment of evaluation. Two women connected by a man neither had fully known, each protective of his legacy in their own way. "The appointment's at 2, Grace said finally. "We'll need to leave by 1. Sarah nodded, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "I'll be ready. But first, I'd like to spend some time with the horses. Especially the foal and its mother. Of course, they're your connection to this place. After all." Grace's expression softened. "Robert would be pleased to see you here, you know. However angry or confused you might be with him." "I'm starting to understand that," Sarah replied. "Better late than never, I suppose." The meeting at the bank had been predictably grim. Despite Grace's dignified presentation of the sanctuary's modest needs and community contributions, the loan officer had been unmoved. The sanctuary had 3 months to become current on its payments or foreclosure proceedings would begin. During the drive back to Willow Creek, Grace maintained a stoic silence that reminded Sarah achingly of Robert in his most troubled moments. She recognized now where that expression had come from. The weight of caring for something vulnerable when resources ran thin. 3 months isn't impossible, Sarah offered, as they pulled into the sanctuary's drive. There must be fundraising options, community support. We've tried those avenues, Grace replied wearily. This area isn't wealthy. People care, but caring doesn't always translate to financial support. The sun was setting by the time they finished evening chores. Sarah had insisted on helping, finding unexpected comfort in the physical labor of feeding, watering and checking each animal. The foal, which Grace had taken to calling Journey after its unexpected travels, stayed close to Sarah whenever she entered its paddock, its trust unwavering. Over a simple dinner, Sarah made her decision. I need to go back tomorrow, she said. To my farm. There are things I need to take care of. Grace nodded, unsurprised. Of course. You have your own life to get back to. That's not what I meant, Sarah clarified. I'm not abandoning this situation. I just need some time to think, to sort through some practical matters. You don't owe this place anything, Sarah. Robert's choices were his own. But I'm making my own choices now. Sarah met the older woman's gaze directly. I'll be back in a few days. Would you mind if I borrowed some of Robert's journals to read while I'm gone? Gracie's expression softened. They're as much yours as anyone's now. Take whatever helps you understand. That night in the cabin, Sarah packed the journals and photographs she wanted to bring home. As she sorted through Robert's belongings, she came across a sign tucked behind the desk. A for sale sign she'd ordered weeks ago, but hadn't yet had the courage to place on their property. She'd brought it with her on this trip, half decided that returning to an empty farm might be the final push she needed to list the property. Now, looking at it in the cabin where Robert had found such purpose, the decision no longer seemed so clear-cut. Morning came with the gentle sounds of the sanctuary waking horses, nickering for breakfast, Grace's quiet movements as she began the day's work. Sarah loaded her few belongings into Robert's truck, then made a final visit to Journey and Midnight's paddock. The foal approached immediately, pressing its muzzle against her hand in greeting. Its wound was healing well, the scar already fading to a thin line along its flank. I'll be back, she promised, stroking its neck where the tag had been. Grace had replaced it with a proper identification band, though she'd kept Robert's original tag safe as a memento of the connection that had led Sarah here. He seems to understand you, Grace observed, joining her at the fence. Some animals are like that, more attuned to certain people. Robert had that gift, Sarah said. I never fully appreciated it until now. Their goodbye was brief, but warm. Two women connected by circumstance finding unexpected common ground. As Sarah drove away, she watched in the rear-view mirror as the sanctuary receded, Grace's figure growing smaller beside the weathered sign that had welcomed her just days ago. The drive home felt shorter somehow, the landscape no longer unfamiliar. When Sarah turned onto the lane leading to her farmhouse, she saw it with fresh eyes, not just as the site of struggles and loss, but as the other half of Robert's divided heart. Hank's truck was parked near the barn. He emerged as she pulled up, his expression a mixture of relief and curiosity. Thought you'd be back yesterday, he said by way of greeting. Everything all right at the county office? Sarah hesitated, the practiced lie no longer sitting comfortably. I wasn't at the county office, Hank. I was at Willow Creek. His momentary confusion gave way to understanding. So you found it, he said quietly. Robert's place. You knew? The realization shouldn't have surprised her, yet somehow it did. Hank removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Not details, just that he had somewhere he went that mattered to him. Asked me once if I thought you'd understand. I told him there was only one way to find out. He never took that chance, Sarah said, the familiar ache of missed opportunities surfacing again. Feared disappointing you more than he feared keeping secrets. I reckon. Hank gestured toward her farmhouse. Place is secure. Checked it daily like you asked. Thank you. Sarah retrieved Robert's journals from the truck. I appreciate your help. As Hank drove away, Sarah stood in her yard, the for sale sign still in the truck bed where she'd left it. The farmhouse that had felt so empty for 2 years now seemed filled with new possibilities. Not despite Robert's divided loyalty, but because of what she had learned from it. She carried the journals inside and placed them on the kitchen table, then walked through each room slowly, seeing traces of Robert she had overlooked or misunderstood. The empty corner where their first horse's saddle had stood before they sold it. The bookshelves where veterinary texts had once outnumbered farming manuals. The desk where he had secretly planned his contributions to a sanctuary miles away. Outside, the sun was setting over her fields that suddenly seemed to hold potential beyond mere survival. She wouldn't post the for sale sign today, perhaps not tomorrow either. First she had some reading to do, some thinking, and then a return journey to make. The weeks following Sarah's return from Willow Creek passed in a flurry of purposeful activity. Each morning she woke with a clarity she hadn't felt since before Robert's death, her mind filled with plans and possibilities that had been dormant for too long. Her first call had been to Dr. Wilson, who arrived at the farm with surprising promptness when she mentioned her visit to the sanctuary. "So you know about Willow Creek now," he said, accepting the coffee she offered as they sat on her porch. "I do," Sarah confirmed. "I'm still processing why so many people knew about Robert's connection to it while I remained in the dark." Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It wasn't our secret to tell, Sarah. Robert was clear about that." "I understand," she said, and found she truly did. "But now I'm making my own decisions. I need your advice." She outlined her emerging plan, converting the unused portion of their barn into a small satellite facility for the sanctuary, a halfway house of sorts for horses, transitioning to adoption. The questions came rapidly then. Proper flooring, ventilation requirements, necessary modifications for the safety of recovering animals. Dr. Wilson listened thoughtfully. "It's ambitious," he said finally, "but not impossible. Your property has good bones for this kind of work." "I have Robert Sue's," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the weathered toolbox she'd retrieved from the equipment shed that morning. "And his books. The rest I can learn." The following days saw her immersed in research, county regulations, zoning requirements, rescue facility standards. She spent hours in the barn with measuring tape and notebook, sketching layouts inspired by what she'd seen at Willow Creek, but adapted to her own space. She called Grace regularly, their conversations evolving from awkward updates to genuine collaboration. "The east side gets better morning light," Grace advised during one such call. "Horses respond well to natural lighting, especially those recovering from trauma." By the third week, the transformation had begun in earnest. Hank arrived one morning with his truck loaded with lumber. "Heard you're remodeling," he said simply. "Thought you could use some help." Together they cleared the disused portion of the barn, removing years of accumulated farm equipment to make space for what was to come. Sarah found herself working from sunrise to sunset, muscles aching in ways they hadn't for years. Yet the physical exhaustion was oddly satisfying. "You seem different," Hank observed one evening as they finished securing new support beams. "More like the Sarah I remember from when you and Robert first moved here." "I feel different," she admitted, surveying their progress with satisfaction. "Like I've found something I lost a long time ago." The work attracted attention. Emma from the general store arrived uninvited. One afternoon, curiosity thinly veiled as a neighborly visit. "Quite the project," she observed, watching Sarah install new window frames. "People in town are wondering what you're up to." "Just making some improvements," Sarah replied, unwilling to share details with the village gossip just yet. "Heard you took a trip recently," Emma pressed. "Found something interesting, did you?" Sarah paused in her work, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "I found a part of Robert I didn't know, and perhaps a part of myself too." Emma left without the gossip she'd come for, but with a thoughtful expression that suggested Sarah's words had landed more deeply than intended. On a warm morning exactly 1 month after her visit to Willow Creek, Sarah stood in the center of the transformed barn space. Fresh sawdust covered new rubber flooring in 3 completed stalls. Windows allowed sunlight to stream in, illuminating walls painted a calming blue-gray that Robert's journal had mentioned was soothing to traumatized horses. The sound of tires on gravel announced Dr. Wilson's arrival. He walked through the space with an appraising eye, testing gates and examining the ventilation system they'd installed. "This is impressive work, Sarah," he said finally. "Your husband would be proud." "There's still so much to do," she replied, gesturing toward her notes where future phases were outlined. A small paddock, with special footing for horses with mobility issues, a treatment area with proper drainage. "But it's a start," Wilson said. "A good one." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about your situation, and Grace's. I might have some connections that could help with funding. People who understand this kind of work." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face. for he chuckled softly. What did you think? You were the only one who cared about what Robert was doing? He touched more lives than you know, Sarah. Not just the horses. That evening Sarah sat on her porch, watching twilight settle over the farm. In her hand was a printout of an email from Grace, with an update on Journey's progress. The foal, no longer quite so small, had fully recovered and was becoming a favorite among visitors to the sanctuary. A photo showed the young horse standing proudly beside its mother, the thin scar on its flank, barely visible now. Looking at it, Sarah felt a sense of connection that transcended the miles between her farm and Willow Creek. The wounded creature that had appeared at her door had led her not just to discoveries about Robert, but to a new path forward for herself. She closed her eyes, feeling the gentle evening breeze against her face, and for the first time in years, the farm around her didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something new. The community bulletin board outside Maplewood's general store had stood for decades as the village's unofficial news hub. Flyers for barn dances mingled with lost pet notices and farm equipment for sale. This morning a new notice held the prime central position, a neatly handwritten card announcing Miller Farm Horse Rescue volunteers needed. Sarah stood back, watching as early morning shoppers paused to read her posting. She'd deliberated for days over the wording, trying to convey the purpose without revealing too much of the personal journey behind it. Finally, she'd settled on simplicity, a brief explanation of the satellite facility for Willow Creek, the types of help needed, and a date for an informational meeting at her farm. Bold move, commented Emma, appearing beside her with a knowing look. Putting it right in the center like that. So I thought it deserved visibility, Sarah replied evenly. Oh, it'll get that all right. Emma's tone softened unexpectedly. For what it's worth, I think Robert would approve. He always did have a soft spot for creatures in need. The comment caught Sarah off guard. You knew about his work at Willow Creek? Emma's expression was uncharacteristically gentle. Not specifics, but a woman in my position hears things. Robert would buy extra feed sometimes, medical supplies, more than your farm needed, she shrugged. People noticed, but they respected his privacy. A knot formed in Sarah's throat. I didn't know. Small towns, Emma said, as if that explained everything. We notice, but we don't always mention. She hesitated, then added, my nephew has some construction experience. I'll send him by to help with those paddock fences you're planning. The conversation left Sarah unsettled as she completed her errands in the village. Had everyone known pieces of Robert's secret life except her? The thought stung, until she remembered Grace's words. He feared hurting you more than he feared maintaining the deception. Her last stop was Dr. Wilson's clinic. His waiting room was empty when she arrived, his receptionist ushering her directly into his office. Perfect timing, he greeted her. I was about to call you. He gestured to several folders spread across his desk. I've been in touch with those connections I mentioned. There's interest in supporting your project. Sarah sat across from him, examining the materials he pushed toward her. Grant applications, foundation contacts, notes from conversations with potential donors. This is more than I expected, she admitted. Wilson's expression turned serious. Robert was respected beyond just our village. Sarah, when people heard about continuing his work, he shrugged. Let's just say doors have opened. I'm still learning what his work really meant. Sarah said quietly. To him, to the animals, to this community. Perhaps that's the point, Wilson replied. Some legacies aren't about buildings or bank accounts, but about continued purpose. He tapped one of the folders. Speaking of which, Tom Jenkins stopped by yesterday. Said his son has a yearling with trust issues that might benefit from your program. Sarah frowned. We're not even operational yet. People are ready for this, Wilson said simply. They've been waiting for something like what Robert started at Willow Creek, just closer to home. By the time Sarah returned to her farm that afternoon, her mind was spinning with conversations and possibilities she hadn't anticipated. She parked beside an unfamiliar truck, finding Emma's nephew already at work reinforcing fence posts along her east pasture. "Hope you don't mind me getting started, Mrs. Miller," he called. "Aunt Emma said you were in a hurry to get this place ready." "Thank you," she managed, momentarily overwhelmed by the unsolicited help. Inside, her phone showed 3 voicemails, all responses to her notice. One from the high school agriculture teacher, offering student volunteers on weekends. Another from a retired veterinary technician in the next county, who had heard about the project through Dr. Wilson. The third from Hank, gruffly announcing that he'd ordered supplies for the water system they'd discussed, and would deliver them tomorrow. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, Robert's journals open before her. "You built something important," she whispered to his memory. "Something that mattered to more people than you knew." That evening, as sunset painted her farm in gold, Sarah walked through the half-completed facility. The new stalls awaited their first occupants. The treatment area still needed equipment, but the transformation was undeniable. What had been abandoned space now held purpose and promise. Her phone rang, Grace calling with their now nightly update. "Journey took his first ride today," Grace announced without preamble. "Just around the paddock, but he handled it beautifully. No fear at all." Sarah smiled, picturing the foal that had arrived wounded at her door now strong enough to carry a rider. "He's come a long way. We all have," Grace replied. "Speaking of which, I heard from the bank today. They've received the first grant payment. We're current on the mortgage for now." The collaboration between their 2 facilities had already borne fruit. Joint grant applications, leveraging Willow Creek's established history with the Miller Farm's community connections, a bridge between Robert's worlds that neither woman could have built alone. "How are things on your end?" Grace asked. "Any response to your community outreach?" Sarah looked out her window to where Emma's nephew was packing up his tools, a section of sturdy new fencing completed. "Yes," she said softly. "It seems the village was ready for this. More than I realized." After they hung up, Sarah moved to her desk and opened her computer. It was time to draft a proper mission statement, a vision that honored both Robert's work and her own emerging purpose. She typed the heading, paused thoughtfully, then continued, "Miller Thompson Equine Rehabilitation, continuing a legacy of second chances, one horse at a time." The familiar sound of tires on gravel drew Sarah from the barn, where she'd been setting up the new treatment area. 3 months had passed since her discovery of Willow Creek, months filled with purpose and progress that had transformed both her farm and her outlook. The vehicle coming up the drive wasn't one she recognized, an older model sedan with out-of-county plates. She shielded her eyes against the late summer sun, then broke into a surprised smile as she recognized the driver. Grace. The older woman emerged slowly from the car, moving with the careful deliberation that Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of her worsening arthritis. Despite this, Grace's smile was warm as Sarah approached. "Thought it was time I saw this place for myself," Grace said by way of greeting. "All these phone calls and emails, yet I've never set foot on the farm Robert talked about so often." They embraced briefly, the initial awkwardness of their first meeting, long since replaced by a hard-won mutual respect. "You should have told me you were coming," Sarah chided gently. "I would have prepared." Grace waved this away. "Spontaneity keeps life interesting. At my age." Her gaze traveled over the property, taking in the renovated barn, the new paddocks, the freshly painted farmhouse. "He'd be proud, you know, seeing what you've done here." "Come inside," Sarah offered. "You must be tired after the drive." In the kitchen, Sarah prepared tea while Grace settled at the table, placing a thick envelope before her. "I brought something," Grace said, her tone suddenly serious. "Something we need to discuss." Sarah set their mugs down, eyeing the envelope. "That looks ominous." "It's the deed to Willow Creek." Grace pushed it toward her. "And some other legal documents my lawyer prepared." Sarah's hands stilled around her mug. "Grace, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm 74 years old, with arthritis that's not improved. The sanctuary needs someone who can carry it forward, Grace's expression was resolute. I've watched what you've accomplished here in just 3 months. You have Robert's gift with the animals and your own determined spirit. I can't take over Willow Creek, Sarah protested. I'm just getting this place established, and it's your home, your life's work, which is precisely why I need to ensure its future. Grace sipped her tea calmly, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. I'm not suggesting you abandon this place. The documents include several options: a formal partnership, a gradual transition, various legal structures. Sarah stared at the envelope, overwhelmed by its implications. This is too much responsibility. Perhaps, Grace acknowledged, but you've already taken on half of it. Joint grant applications, the coordinated rehabilitation program, the shared volunteers. We're already functioning as sister facilities. It was true. Over the past months, their separate operations had become increasingly intertwined. Sarah focusing on initial assessments and early rehabilitation, Willow Creek providing long-term care and adoption services. The arrangement had evolved naturally, each woman contributing her strengths to a shared mission. I need time to think about this, Sarah said finally. Of course. No decisions need to be made today. They moved outside after tea, Sarah giving Grace a tour of the changes she'd made to the property. The renovated barn drew approving nods, as did the specialized paddock flooring designed for horses with hoof injury. Your first arrivals are settling in well, Grace observed, watching a pair of rescued yearlings grazing peacefully in the nearest pasture. They've exceeded our expectations, Sarah agreed. Dr. Wilson thinks they'll be ready for adoption training within a month. Their tour was interrupted by the arrival of several vehicles, local volunteers coming for their regular afternoon shift. Sarah introduced Grace to each of them, not missing the look of recognition that passed between Grace and Emma, who had become one of the program's most dedicated supporters. So you're the famous Grace Thompson, Emma said, shaking the older Alden's hand. Robert spoke highly of you. Did he now? Grace replied with a small smile. He mentioned you too, said you knew everything worth knowing in 3 counties. Emma laughed, pleased. Not everything, clearly, but I'm making up for lost time. She gestured toward the activity around the barn. Sarah's brought something special to our community, something we needed without realizing it. As the volunteers dispersed to their assigned tasks, a truck appeared on the horizon, Hank returning from Willow Creek, where he'd delivered supplies and picked up a special passenger. In the truck bed, secured in a custom transport crate, stood a now familiar chestnut form. Journey, Sarah exclaimed as they approached. Thought it was time for a reunion, Grace explained. He's ready for the next phase of his training, and your facility is better equipped for that now. The young horse, no longer the wounded foal that had appeared at her door, nickered in recognition as Sarah approached. With Hank's help, they unloaded him into the training paddock, where he pranced excitedly, clearly remembering the farm. He knows he's come full circle, Grace observed, watching the horse explore his new yet familiar surroundings. Some animals have that sense of places, of people, of purpose. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah watched Grace interacting with the volunteers, sharing knowledge accumulated through decades of rescue work. Despite her physical limitations, Grace's passion remained evident in every demonstration, every piece of advice. Looking at the animated group gathered in what had once been her lonely farmyard, Sarah felt a clarity she'd been approaching for months. Grace hadn't come seeking a caretaker for her sanctuary. She'd come offering a partnership that would strengthen both their efforts, a vision larger than either could achieve alone. The deed to Willow Creek still lay on Sarah's kitchen table, a weighty symbol of trust and shared purpose. By sunset, she knew what her answer would be. 6 months had passed since the wounded foal had limped into Sarah's life, changing its course in ways she never could have imagined. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh hay and wood smoke as she stood beside Grace on the newly built observation deck, overlooking both properties. The Miller-Thompson Horse Sanctuary, made official 3 months ago with the signing of partnership papers, now operated seamlessly across 2 locations, with the original Willow Creek facility specializing in long-term rehabilitation and the Miller Farm handling initial assessments and training programs. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Grace remarked, her gaze sweeping over the expanded facilities where volunteers moved efficiently between tasks. "Robert would hardly recognize the place. I think he'd recognize the spirit of it," Sarah replied, watching as Dr. Wilson conducted a training session for new volunteers in the covered arena Robert had once sketched in his plans. The wooden sign they had crafted together hung proudly at the entrance to the property, the combined name a testament to 2 families united by a shared purpose. Sarah traced her fingers over the carved letters, remembering the day they had raised it together, their village turning out for the official opening celebration, Emma organizing refreshments, Hank supervising the installation, Journey's coming along beautifully with the new program, Grace observed as they made their way toward the training paddock, where the now yearling horse was demonstrating remarkable skill with one of their youngest volunteers, a shy teenage girl who had found unexpected confidence through their equine therapy initiative. "He's a natural teacher," Sarah agreed. "Seems to know exactly how much to challenge them without causing fear." Journey had indeed grown into an exceptional animal, his early trauma transformed into a unique sensitivity that made him particularly effective with the sanctuary's community outreach programs. Schools now brought students for monthly visits, and local therapists referred clients for equine-assisted therapy sessions. The sanctuary's financial situation had stabilized through a combination of grants, community support, and innovative programming. The mortgage that had once threatened Willow Creek's existence was now manageable, though they operated on a careful budget that honored the rescue mission above all. "I found something yesterday," Grace said as they reached the small office they now shared, "in Robert's old filing cabinet at Willow Creek. Thought you should see it." She handed Sarah a worn leather journal she hadn't seen before. Unlike the daily logs of sanctuary operations, this one contained more personal reflections, Robert's private thoughts about the work, the animals, and unexpectedly, about Sarah. One entry, dated just weeks before his death, caught her eye. "Midnight arrived today, heavily pregnant and severely malnourished. Another auction rescue, another soul discarded when no longer profitable. Grace thinks she's carrying a colt. Something about this mare reminds me of Sarah, that same wary determination, that refusal to give up despite circumstances. I've decided to tag the foal with our home coordinates when it's born. A connection between my 2 worlds that feels right somehow. Perhaps someday Sarah will find her way here through this small life that hasn't even begun yet. Perhaps this might be the bridge I've failed to build in other ways." The entry continued, detailing his hopes for expanding the sanctuary, his regrets about the distance that had grown in his marriage, his dreams of eventually bringing these separate parts of his life together. "He had it all planned," Sarah said softly, looking up at Grace. "Journey finding me, leading me here. He created a path he hoped I'd follow someday. He couldn't have known how it would unfold," Grace replied. "But yes, I think he planted seeds for a future he wouldn't see." Outside the office window, Journey trotted past, strong and confident, the scar on his flank now barely visible, a faint reminder of the journey that had brought him to Sarah's door and her to this new purpose. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property as volunteers completed their day's work. Sarah moved through the familiar routine of evening checks, greeting each animal by name, noting their progress, adjusting care plans. What had once been overwhelming now felt natural, as if she'd been preparing for this role her entire life, without knowing it. In the main barn, a framed photograph hung in the central aisle, Robert kneeling beside a horse much like Midnight, his expression capturing the quiet joy he'd found in this work. Beside it now hung a newer image, Sarah, Grace, and Journey surrounded by volunteers at the sanctuary's official opening. "Full circle," Dr. Wilson commented, pausing beside her to admire the photos. "From one man's private mission to a community effort that's helping people as much as horses, that's the true legacy," Sarah replied. "Not just the buildings or programs, but the connections formed, the healing that happens on both sides of the fence." As twilight settled over the sanctuary, Sarah made her final stop at Journey's store. The young horse greeted her with the same soft nicker he'd offered on that first evening when he'd appeared wounded and alone on her doorstep. She stroked his neck, marveling at the sequence of events his arrival had set in motion. "You brought me home," she told him quietly, "just as Robert hoped you would." From the entrance to the barn, Grace watched with a knowing smile. "Ready to call it a day?" she called. "Emma's bringing dinner to the farmhouse. Says she has news about another potential rescue coming up from the southern counties." Sarah gave Journey a final pat and turned toward the future that continued to unfold before her, a future built on loss and discovery, on secrets revealed and purposes found, on a wounded foal that had followed a woman home and changed everything. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it in ways that encompassed far more than dinner plans. The path ahead was clear now, illuminated by the legacy Robert had left and the new one she was building alongside it.